The oak tree came down on a Tuesday, and Clark Shepard nearly wept when he saw it. Not because of the tree itself, though it was a magnificent thing, centuries old and wide as two men standing shoulder to shoulder. He nearly wept because of the little girl standing beside it with her hands pressed flat against the fallen trunk, her dark braids hanging over her shoulders, and the most devastated expression he had ever seen on a human face. She could not have been more than 5 years old. And she was looking at that fallen oak, the way soldiers looked at fallen comrades. Clark had been passing through Millhaven, New Mexico territory, on a Tuesday in the spring of 1883, which was the same Tuesday a violent overnight storm had torn through the valley and brought down the oldest tree in the county. He had no reason to stop. He had no reason to care about anything in this particular town, because he had made it his business, for the better part of 4 years, to not care about anything anywhere. That was the dark secret he carried inside himself like a stone. He had become deliberately, methodically empty, but then he saw the little girl. And then he saw her mother come running out of the farmhouse 40 yards away, apron streaked with flour, dark hair escaping its pins, calling out a name he could not yet hear over the wind that was still kicking up dust across the territory. The woman reached the child and dropped to her knees in the mud, gathering her up, and even from the road Clark could see that the child was not injured, only heartbroken, and somehow that was worse. He watched the mother hold her daughter, and he watched the little girl bury her face in her mother's neck, and he felt something move inside his chest that he had believed to be permanently dead. He should have ridden on. He did not ride on. He pulled his horse to a stop at the fence line and held his hat against the last of the morning wind, and he made the single decision that would alter every remaining year of his life, though he could not have known it then. He decided to see if anyone needed help clearing the road. That was the lie he told himself. The truth was something deeper, something that had to do with a little girl and a fallen tree, and the particular way a mother moved when she was trying to be strong for her child while her own heart was breaking. He had seen that movement before, in a different woman, in a different place, under different and far darker circumstances. The hidden motive behind every choice he had made since then lived inside that memory, and he kept it locked away the same way he kept everything locked away. He tied his horse to the fence post and walked toward them. Susanna Walker heard the footsteps behind her before she heard the voice, and she rose to her feet with her daughter Lily still held against her hip, turning to face the stranger with the particular wariness that every woman alone on the frontier learned to wear like a second skin. She had been alone for 11 months. Her husband Thomas had died of a fever the previous April, and since then Susanna had been running the Walker homestead by herself, 30 acres of hard New Mexico soil that produced just enough to keep her and Lily fed, and just little enough to keep her permanently on the edge of exhaustion. She had no family within 500 miles. She had no secrets worth keeping except the ones that involved survival, and she kept those fiercely. The man at her fence line was tall, broad through the shoulders, with several days of dark beard on a jaw that looked like it had been assembled from good intentions and hard experience. He wore a gray duster that had seen considerable weather, and his hat was the kind of hat that had been shaped by years of being pulled on and off in the rain. He was perhaps 30 years old, perhaps a shade younger or older. It was difficult to tell with men who lived outdoors. His eyes were dark and direct, and he was looking at Lily with an expression that Susanna found difficult to categorize. It was not threatening. It was not predatory. It was something closer to recognition, as though he had seen something in her daughter that he understood from the inside. "Morning," he said. "Name's Clark Shepard. I was passing on the road and saw the tree came down. Thought you might need help clearing it if it's blocking your access." Susanna looked at him steadily. She had learned in 11 months of solitude to read men quickly and completely. This was a skill the frontier demanded of widows. "It is not blocking the road," she said. "It fell into my yard." He looked at the tree and then back at her. "I can see that. Then you can also see I have no need of road clearing." "No," he agreed. but you might have need of someone who knows what to do with a downed oak." She did not say anything to that. Lily, who was 5 and unencumbered by her mother's hard-won caution, leaned out from Susanna's hip and said, "That was my climbing tree." Clark Shepard looked at the child with that same expression of quiet recognition. "Was it a good one?" "It was the best one," Lily said, with the absolute conviction of a 5-year-old stating geological fact. "I believe you," he said. "A tree that old is always the best kind." Lily considered him for a moment with the same direct assessment her mother had just performed, and apparently reached a more favorable conclusion because she said, "Can you fix it?" He looked at the fallen tree for a long moment, and Susanna watched something work itself out behind his eyes. "No," he said honestly. "A tree that old, once it falls, it does not go back up. But there are other things you can do with a good oak once it is down." "Like what?" Lily asked. "Like build something," he said. That was how it started. Susanna did not invite him in. She was not naive about the risks of inviting strange men into her home and her life, and she was particularly not naive about the risks of allowing her daughter to form attachments to men who were simply passing through. Drifters passed through Millhaven on a regular basis, and they were of a particular type. They came with dark pasts they did not discuss and hidden motives they dressed up in helpfulness. And they stayed until they got what they wanted, and then they moved on, leaving nothing behind except the kind of emptiness that was harder to bear than the original loneliness because you had let yourself believe, just briefly, that it might be different. She had not believed that about Thomas, who had been steady and kind and present for 8 years before the fever took him. The absence of Thomas was a clean wound, which was the only mercy of loving a good man. What she was determined to guard against was the messy kind, the kind that came from misplaced trust. So she watched Clark Shepard from the kitchen window as he walked the length of the fallen oak, examining it with careful hands, tapping the wood the way a doctor taps a chest. She watched him pull a small notebook from his duster pocket and make notes in it, and she wondered what kind of drifter kept a notebook. She watched Lily follow him at a respectful 3-foot distance, asking questions at regular intervals, and she watched him answer each question with the same patience and directness he had used at the fence line. He did not talk down to Lily. He did not perform for her. He simply answered her questions as though they were reasonable questions from a reasonable person, which they were. After perhaps 40 minutes, he came to the door and knocked twice. Susanna opened it but did not step back to indicate he should enter. "Well," she said. "It is good wood," he said. "Dry in the heartwood despite the storm. The outer rings are damaged but the center is sound." He paused. "What do you intend to do with it?" "I had not yet decided." He nodded. He pulled the notebook from his pocket and held it out to her. On the page was a rough sketch, done in the clean, practiced lines of someone who knew how to draw practical things. It showed a swing. A simple one, a seat of flat oak planks suspended from 2 ropes looped over a high branch. The design was clean and strong, and even in rough pencil she could see that the proportions were right, that the swing seat was the right width for a small child, that the branch selected in the sketch was exactly the branch in the yard behind her that was closest to the ground, and angled in the direction of the afternoon breeze. She stared at the sketch for longer than she intended to. "There is enough wood here for a swing that would last 20 years, he said. "Maybe more if it is oiled and kept out of standing water. I can have it done by nightfall if you will let me work." Susanna looked at the sketch and then at the man who had drawn it. She looked at the calluses on his hands, which were real working calluses and not the kind a man acquired sitting at a card table. She looked at the worn but clean state of his clothing. She looked at his eyes, which were direct and not evasive, and she thought about the way he had spoken to Lily. "I cannot pay you," she said. It was the most honest thing she could offer him, and she offered it as a test of some kind. "I did not ask for payment," he said, also honestly. "Then what do you want?" she said. Because in her experience, which was the experience of a woman who had survived 11 months alone in a territory where survival required constant negotiation with the motives of others, No one did anything for nothing. He was quiet for a moment in a way that suggested he was deciding how much of an answer to give her. "I want to build the swing," he said finally. "That is all I can tell you right now." It was not a complete answer. She knew that. But it was not a lie, and she had developed a sensitive instrument for lies, and the instrument was not activating. "There is a water pump at the side of the house," she said. "You can use it. I will bring food out at noon." He nodded and turned back toward the fallen tree. He worked with a hand axe, and a two-man crosscut saw that he used one-handed, which was awkward but which he managed through sheer physical insistence. And Susanna, watching from the kitchen as she kneaded bread, found herself recalibrating her estimate of his strength upward. He split the oak with a precision that spoke of long practice, selecting pieces of the trunk with the same care a craftsman used with fine timber, rejecting pieces that did not meet some internal standard she could not read from a distance but which she trusted instinctively because every piece he selected was, she noted when she looked at them later in the afternoon, genuinely superior. He sang while he worked, not loudly, not performing. Just quietly to himself, an old hymn she half recognized, and there was something about that private singing, that unself-conscious expression of internal state, that made her lower her guard by approximately 2 degrees. She brought him food at noon as she had promised, cornbread and cold beans and a tin cup of coffee, which she set on the fence post rather than handing to him directly. He came and took it and ate standing, looking at his progress on the wood, and when he finished he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Walker," which told her that he had asked about her at some point, probably in town the night before, and had known her name before he stopped at her fence this morning. That should have disturbed her more than it did. "You knew my name," she said. "I did," he said. He did not offer an excuse for it. "Why did you stop?" He looked at the fallen tree for a moment. Then he looked at her with those dark, direct eyes. "Because of your daughter," he said. Susanna held still and waited for the full weight of whatever he meant by that. "I saw her with the tree," he said. "I saw what it meant to her." He paused. "Every child deserves something to love," he said, as though it were a law of nature he had discovered personally and had been carrying with him. "I can give her that much." The simplicity of it, the unadorned conviction in it, broke something open in Susanna that she had not known was sealed. She picked up his tin cup and his empty plate and walked back to the house, and she did not let him see the thing that had broken open because she did not yet trust it. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he had the wood shaped. He had cut a seat board from the densest section of the trunk, 18 inches wide and an inch and a half thick, smooth as furniture on its upper face where he had used a drawknife he produced from his saddlebag, with the natural edge of the bark left on the 2 short ends because he said it gave a child something to grip. He had drilled the rope holes with a brace and bit, and he had used a section of hemp rope from his saddlebag that he said was load-rated for 5 times what a child weighed. Lily had been watching the whole process from her 3-foot distance, and at 4 o'clock she was sitting on the fence watching him with undisguised admiration that Susanna, observing from the garden, found simultaneously charming and dangerous. "Are you going to stay?" Lily asked him. Clark's hands did not stop working, but Susanna saw something in the line of his shoulders. "I pass through places," he said carefully. "I do not tend to stay in them." "Why not?" Lily asked, with the relentless interrogative accuracy of the very young. He was quiet for a moment. "That is a complicated question," he said. "Mama says complicated questions have important answers," Lily said. He looked toward the house, and Susanna turned quickly back to her garden to avoid being caught watching. He hung the swing from a branch of the white oak tree at the back of the property, the one that had not fallen, a different tree but a strong one, and the rope went over a branch 10 feet up, and he tested it himself first, hanging his full weight from it for a count of 20 before he would allow Lily near it. When he set Lily on the seat and pushed her gently, and she grabbed the rope and laughed, the sound of that laugh traveled across the yard and hit Susanna somewhere directly behind the sternum. She stood at the edge of the garden with her hand on the fence post and watched her daughter swing in the late afternoon light. And she watched Clark Shepard step back from the swing with his hands in his duster pockets, watching the child with an expression that was private and complicated and deeply familiar to her, because she had seen it on her own face in the mirror on mornings when the weight of everything was particularly acute. It was the expression of someone who was carrying grief they had not yet been able to put down. She walked over to him. She stood beside him and they watched Lily swing together in silence for a moment. "You lost someone," she said. It was not a question. He did not respond immediately. The silence stretched out long enough that she thought he might not answer at all, which would have been his right. "A long time ago," he said. "A child," another silence. "A sister," he said. "She was 6. Susanna absorbed that. She did not say she was sorry, because she had been on the receiving end of that particular sentence enough to know that it often meant nothing and sometimes made things worse. Instead, she said she would have liked the swing. She felt rather than saw him turn to look at her. "Yes," he said, "she would have." That evening she did something that surprised herself. She invited him to supper. She told herself practical reasons. It was late, it was a 10-mile ride to the nearest decent place to eat, and he had given a full day's labor for free, which deserved at minimum a meal in return. These were all true. They were not the complete truth. The complete truth was that she was not ready for him to leave yet, and that realization frightened her considerably, which was why she dressed it in practicality before she let herself act on it. They ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, and Lily talked for most of the meal, which was a mercy because it meant Susanna did not have to navigate the complicated terrain of talking to Clark Shepard directly with the full force of her attention. She observed him instead through the angle of conversation, the way he listened, the way he laughed at Lily's stories, the way he ate, which was careful and unhurried and slightly formal in a way that spoke of manners learned young. After Lily was put to bed, Susanna and Clark sat on the porch in the warm New Mexico night, and the silence between them was different from the silence she had with herself. His was populated. She could feel the weight of the things he was not saying, and she recognized that weight because she carried a similar one. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Originally, Missouri," he said. "A town called Cartwright just west of Springfield. I left when I was 18. That was 12 years ago." He looked at her with a slight shift of expression that told her the calculation had surprised him. "Yes," he said, "and you have been drifting that whole time, more or less. That is a long time to be passing through places." He was quiet. The night insects performed their steady chorus. Somewhere in the middle distance, a coyote said its piece to the darkness. "After my sister died," he said slowly, "I found I did not want to be still anywhere. Stillness meant feeling things I was not ready to feel." He paused. "There was also other trouble, in Missouri." She waited because she had learned that the thing a man said after there was other trouble was often the most important thing he would say all evening. "I was working for a man named Gerald Haas," Clark said. "He owned the largest spread in 3 counties. I was a hand on his cattle operation. He was also involved in things that were not cattle, and I was naive enough not to understand that for the first year I worked for him. When I did understand, I made the mistake of telling him I would not be part of it. What happened? He arranged to have it appear that I had stolen from him," Clark said. "The local sheriff was paid. I had a choice between prison or running." He said it with the flat directness of someone who had made his peace with the facts of a thing, even if not with the thing itself. "I ran. I have been moving ever since." Susanna looked at the dark yard. "Are you still wanted?" "In Missouri, technically. Not anywhere else. And the man who arranged it died 2 years ago, which means the immediate danger is past, but the record still exists somewhere and I am cautious about it." He looked at her. "I am telling you this because you are a woman alone and you deserve to know what kind of man has been working in your yard today." The honesty of it, the deliberate and uncomfortable honesty of it, moved her more than any performance of virtue would have. It was the kind of honesty that trusted her with a difficult truth and asked nothing in return for the trust, and that was rare, rarer than she had realized until this moment. "I appreciate you telling me," she said. "Does it change things?" She thought about it genuinely. "No," she said. "No, I do not think it does." They sat with that for a while. "What about you?" he asked. "You did not grow up here." She smiled slightly at that. "Is it so obvious? Your speech is different, Eastern, and there is a particular way people who grew up on the frontier hold themselves, like the land is something they have to be ready for at any moment. You hold yourself differently." She was surprised by the precision of the observation. "I am from Pennsylvania," she said. "Philadelphia. My father was a physician. I came west with Thomas in 1875 when I was 22. He had land claim in New Mexico, and I had the particular romantic conviction that frontier life was an adventure." She paused. "It is an adventure. It is simply not the kind of adventure I was imagining. You do not regret it." She looked out at the dark yard where the swing hung invisible in the blackness, and she thought about Lily and about Thomas and about the 30 acres and about this moment, sitting on a porch with a drifter who had spent his day building her daughter a swing because every child deserved something to love. "No," she said, "I do not regret it." He slept in the barn that night because she offered, and because the alternative was the road, and in the morning she found him already awake and working, examining the homestead fence line with the same systematic attention he had given the fallen oak. "The north fence has 3 broken posts," he said when she came out with coffee. "And your water trough by the barn has a crack in it that will fail in the next heavy rain." She stood with her hands wrapped around her coffee mug and looked at him steadily. "Are you planning to stay?" "I am planning to fix your fence and your trough," he said. "If you will let me, I can be on the road by tomorrow evening." She considered him. She thought about the dark past he had shared with her, the hidden motive she had suspected, and which had turned out to be something both simpler and more complicated than mercenary intention. She thought about Lily and the swing and the particular laugh her daughter had produced when she was first pushed into motion. "3 days," she said. "I have 3 days of work that needs doing that I cannot do alone. After that you are free to go." She paused. "And I will pay you in meals and a place to sleep. I cannot do better than that." He nodded. "That is fair." The 3 days passed in the way that meaningful things pass, both too quickly and with a density of experience that made each hour feel substantial. Clark worked with a focused efficiency that Susanna found herself watching with something beyond simple observation. He repaired the fence, replaced the trough, rehung the barn door that had been listing since October, and rebuilt the chicken coop wall that the storm had buckled. He did not ask her for guidance on any of it. He simply assessed what was needed and did it, and the doing of it was clean and precise, and had a quality of care that she had not seen applied to her property since Thomas. She did not allow herself to complete that comparison. It felt disloyal to Thomas and premature about Clark, and she kept both loyalties strictly enforced. Lily, meanwhile, had fully adopted Clark Shepard into her internal world, with the swift and absolute conviction that very young children applied to things they had decided to love. She followed him everywhere. She told him things, her opinions about the relative friendliness of the different chickens, her theory about where the wind went when it stopped, her memory of her father, which was partial and precious, and which she offered Clark with the same open-handedness she offered everything. Susanna watched him receive those confidences with a gentleness that cost him something. She could see that it cost him something, and that he gave it anyway. On the second evening, after supper, Susanna asked him about the other places he had been. Not to keep him talking, though he had a good voice for the night air, but because she was genuinely curious about the shape of 12 years of moving. He had been in Texas for 2 years, working cattle. He had spent a summer in Colorado during the silver rush of 1879, not mining himself but supplying the camps, which was less romantic but more consistently profitable. He had been in Arizona territory during the conflict that culminated in what the newspapers were calling the gunfight at the OK Corral 2 years before, though he had been 40 miles from Tombstone and had not been directly involved. He had spent time in Kansas and in Wyoming and had briefly crossed into Mexico and come back. He had never stayed anywhere long enough to be known. "What is it like?" Susanna asked. "To be unknown everywhere." He thought about that for a genuine moment. "It is like carrying a lamp that no one can see," he said. "You can see everything around you. No one can see you." She let that settle. "Is that freedom or loneliness?" "Both," he said, "depending on the day." She understood that in a way she had not expected to understand it. On the morning of the third day, she found him at the kitchen table before sunrise with his notebook open, and what he was drawing was not a practical diagram. She saw it before he became aware of her presence and closed the notebook with a quiet deliberateness. It was her house. He had been drawing her house, the specific angle of the roof and the shape of the porch and the oak tree in the back, visible over the roofline and the swing. She pretended she had not seen it. He left that afternoon as he had said he would. He saddled his horse and tied his saddlebag, and Lily, who had been informed of the departure at noon and had spent 2 hours being brave about it with diminishing success, finally surrendered to the not braveness of it entirely and cried at the fence in the straightforward, undisguised way of a child who does not yet know the social protocols of hiding grief. Clark crouched down in front of her and was very serious about it. "I will be back," he said. "People say that," Lily said, in a tone that was not accusatory but simply factual and which contained, Susanna realized with a sharp intake of breath, all of the accumulated wisdom of a 5-year-old who had already lost one person who had said things and then been gone. Clark was quiet for a moment. "Your mother needs to agree to that," he said. "But if she does, I will be back." He stood up and looked at Susanna, and there was something in the look that was a question and an offer and a vulnerability all at once, and she recognized it because she was feeling something approximately parallel, standing on the other side of the fence. "You can come back," she said. She said it evenly and without indication of the interior weather that had produced the words, and he nodded and swung up into the saddle, and she watched him ride down the road until he was gone, and then she stood there for a moment in the particular aftermath of a departure, and she let herself feel the shape of what was there. He came back 3 weeks later. He rode into the yard on a Thursday morning with a load of lumber in a borrowed wagon and a supply list that he must have been planning since before he left, because the lumber was exactly the right quantity and grade for the back wall of the barn, which she had mentioned once in passing, on the second day, as a thing she was worried about. The fact that he had remembered it, had noted it in that notebook, had sourced the materials and brought them back, hit her with a force she was not prepared for. "You planned this before you left," she said. "Yes," he said. "You were planning to come back before you even knew I would let you." "I was hoping," he said. "It is not the same as assuming." She stood with her hands on her hips and looked at him in the full morning sun, and she thought about all the reasons this was complicated. The dark past, the life of movement, the dead end of attachments to men who kept moving. She thought about Lily and the swing and the particular quality of Clark Shepard's attention when it was directed at something he cared about, which was an intense and focused thing that made the recipient of it feel both seen and somehow safer than before. "You can stay a week," she said. "Longer if there is work." He stayed 3 months. It was not planned and it was not discussed, but it happened with the quiet inevitability of things that are structurally correct. He fixed the barn wall, and then the south fence, and then the stone foundation of the root cellar that had been subsiding since the previous winter. He broke the new ground in the east field that Thomas had always intended to cultivate and never gotten to. He rebuilt the chimney of the kitchen fireplace, which had been drafting badly, and he oiled every hinge and latch in the house. And one morning she came downstairs to find him replacing the kitchen window glass that had cracked in the original storm 4 months before. She stood in the kitchen doorway watching him work the glass putty with careful fingers, and she asked him where he had learned all of this, all these different skills, and he said that a man who moved as much as he had moved learned what was needed in each place he stopped, because it was the currency of passage, and she thought about that for a long time afterward. In those 3 months they learned each other the way you learn a thing you intend to keep, carefully, with attention to the details that don't show on the surface. She learned that he read everything he could find, that he carried 3 books in his saddlebag, and traded them at general stores for different books, and that his taste ran to history and natural science with an occasional novel, and that he read with the same focused intensity he applied to physical work. She learned that he cooked reasonably well when given a proper kitchen to work in, and that he had strong opinions about coffee that she found both amusing and accurate. She learned that he had nightmares, not often but regularly, and that on the mornings after them he was quieter than usual and spent more time with the horses, who seemed to understand something about him. He learned that she was considerably more educated than the frontier tended to produce, that she had opinions about things, and was not interested in performing the deferential femininity that the territory often demanded of women, and that this was related to her Philadelphia upbringing in ways he found interesting rather than challenging. He learned that she was physically braver than she allowed herself to appear, that she had quietly handled a rattlesnake in the yard one afternoon with a garden hoe and the focused calm of someone executing a task, and had told him about it later with the matter-of-fact tone of a person who had been dealing with the hazards of New Mexico for 8 years, and was not interested in being congratulated for it. He learned that she cried once, in the first month he was there, standing at Thomas's grave at the back of the property, and that she did not know he had seen her, and he never told her. The tension between them was present from the beginning, but it was not the anxious, destabilizing tension of people who cannot read each other. It was the tension of people who can read each other extremely well and who are, for that reason, proceeding carefully because they understand the stakes. The moment it changed was a Sunday afternoon in August. Susanna had been to church in Millhaven in the morning, and Lily had been left in Clark's care, which was no longer the uncomfortable proposition it had been 3 months ago. She had come home to find them in the yard. Clark had his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow and was standing below the swing, and Lily was on the swing at full height, higher than Susanna usually pushed her, and Lily was shouting something, and then Susanna heard the something, and it was, "Higher, Papa, higher." She stopped at the gate. She stood there with her hand on the gate latch and felt the word land in her chest with the specific impact of something that is both unexpected and completely inevitable. She watched Clark catch Lily on the backswing and push her forward and heard her daughter laugh, and she looked at the whole picture of it, the swing he had built and the child who loved it and the man who was, at this moment, being called by the name of the man she had buried. She must have made some sound because Clark turned and saw her, and in the fraction of a second before he could arrange his expression she saw everything: the shock, the tenderness, the uncertainty, the fear. Lily saw her mother and waved from the swing, entirely unaware of the seismic event she had just produced. Susanna opened the gate and walked into the yard, and she busied herself with her bonnet strings and her apron until she had her face in order, and then she said, in a voice that was mostly steady, "Did you have a good morning?" "We made cornbread," Lily said from the swing. "I can see that," Susanna said, noting the flour still on Clark's forearm. Clark was watching her with a careful quiet that she recognized as him giving her room, not rushing toward or away from the moment, simply holding the space of it, and she found that she loved him for that, and the realization that she loved him for that came in on top of everything else, and suddenly the yard was a great deal to stand in. She went inside and she stood at the kitchen window, and she had a conversation with herself that was direct and uncomfortable and honest, the same kind of conversation she imagined he had had with himself at various points over the past 3 months. The honest conclusion of the conversation was that she was in love with Clark Shepard. She had been in love with him, she thought, since the afternoon he crouched down in front of Lily and told her, "I will be back," not because it was what Lily wanted to hear, but because it was the true thing. She was also afraid. She was afraid because he was a man made for movement, because his dark past included an entanglement with the law that could resurface with the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of lawman, because she did not know with certainty that he would stay even if she asked, and because asking implied a vulnerability that she had spent 11 months constructing defenses against. She was still at the window when he came inside. He stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "I want to talk about what she said." "Lily is 5, Susanna said. She calls the rooster Gerald, she names everything." "Yes," he said, "but you heard it." She turned from the window and faced him. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his sleeves still rolled and that expression of careful honesty he gave to the things that mattered, and she thought about all the things she had been defending herself against, and whether any of them were actually stronger than what was in this kitchen right now. "What are you asking me?" she said. He was quiet for a long moment, not evasive, gathering something. "I want to ask you something," he said, "but I need you to know something first." She waited. "I am not passing through anymore," he said. "I have not been passing through since about the 4th day I was here. I have been pretending to be a man who is passing through because it seemed the safer thing for both of us, but it is not true." He looked at her with those dark, direct eyes. "I have been planning to ask you if I could stay. Not for a week, not for a season. I have been planning to ask if I could stay, and I could not ask it without telling you that first, because you deserve to know what you are agreeing to when you answer." Susanna's hands were folded in front of her and she was very still. "You have a complicated situation," she said. "Missouri." "Yes," he said. "I have been thinking about that. There are lawyers in Santa Fe who deal with exactly this kind of historical legal trouble. It costs money I do not currently have, but I could earn it. The man who made the accusation is dead. The evidence was fabricated. It is not a certain resolution, but it is a possible one. And if it is not resolved, then I am a man with a legal problem in Missouri who never goes back to Missouri," he said, "which I was not planning to do in any case." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Thomas, who had been a different kind of man, steady and good and deeply familiar from their first day in this place. And she thought about this man who was also steady and good but who had been made by entirely different forces, and she thought about love, which was not always a single kind of thing. "Lily called you Papa," she said. "I know. She will not stop calling you that if you stay." "I know," he said. "I do not want her to stop." That was the answer that settled it. Not for reasons of sentimentality, but because it contained the full weight of his intention, stated simply and without performance, and she had been paying attention to the difference between performance and truth for 11 months, and she knew which one this was. "Then stay," she said. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and she let him hold her, and she let herself be held, and the specific quality of that holding, which was careful and fierce at the same time, made her understand that this was not the beginning of something. This was the middle of something that had already begun on the morning he walked through her gate and crouched down in front of her daughter and listened to her talk about a fallen tree. That night, after Lily was in bed, they sat on the porch in the warm August dark and they talked for 3 hours. They talked about the future with the practical detail of 2 people who were building something real. They talked about the land and the money and the legal situation and Santa Fe and what would need to happen and in what order. They talked about the things they wanted. She wanted the farm to grow, wanted the East Field to produce, wanted Lily in a proper school within the next 2 years. He wanted the legal situation resolved and then to be settled, fully and permanently settled for the first time in 12 years. He wanted to build things, not just repairs, structures. He had ideas for the farm that she had not considered: additional outbuildings, a better arrangement of the water supply, a proper garden with a real fence. And toward the end of the conversation, after the practical things had been given their proper space, she said, "Tell me about her, your sister." He was quiet for a moment with his eyes on the dark yard. "Her name was May," he said. "She was the youngest of 4. She died of a fever, the same fever that took half the children in our county that winter." He paused. "She was a child who needed something to love. She had a dog she was devoted to. She had a particular tree she climbed every afternoon. When she was gone, the tree felt like evidence of her, and it was both the hardest thing to look at and the only thing that helped. Susanna reached over in the dark and put her hand over his, and he turned his hand over and held it. "That is why the swing," she said. "Yes," he said, "that is why the swing." He proposed to her in September, on a cool morning when the light had turned the particular slanted gold of early autumn. He did it without ceremony, not because it was not important to him, but because ceremony between them had always felt artificial, and what he offered her instead was the real thing, a direct question in plain language on the porch with coffee in their hands, and the full weight of what he meant behind it. She said yes before he had quite finished the sentence, and she did not feel reckless for it. They were married in October in Millhaven by the town's Baptist minister, a small ceremony with a few neighbors and the general store owner and his wife, who had been Susanna's closest acquaintance in the territory. Lily wore a dress that Susanna had made from blue calico, and she carried a small bunch of late wildflowers, and when the minister asked the assembled if there was any reason the two should not be joined, Lily said clearly and helpfully, "He built my swing," which produced laughter from every adult present, and which Susanna was certain she would remember for the rest of her life. Clark Shepard took the name of Walker by common usage in the territory, not legally, not yet, because of the Missouri situation, but practically, around Millhaven, he was known as the man on the Walker farm, and the simplicity of that belonging, the ease of being known in a place, was something he had not felt since before the trouble, and it was both smaller and larger than he had expected. The winter of 1883 was a hard one even by New Mexico standards. There were weeks when the temperature dropped to places that the territory was not supposed to drop, and Susanna and Clark were both occupied with the continuous physical work of keeping the animals alive, and the pipes from freezing and the firewood supply sufficient. They worked together with the easy synchrony of people who had been working together long enough to know each other's habits without discussion, and there was a deep comfort in that synchrony that Susanna found she had not been expecting. It was a different comfort from what she had had with Thomas, not lesser, not greater, but genuinely different in its specific quality, which was the quality of two people who had each come to this place from a very long way away and had found, in the arriving, something neither had been certain was real. In February, during a break in the cold when the sun came out and turned everything brilliant, Clark took Lily outside after the noon meal and they went to the swing together. The ground was hard and the air was sharp, and he pushed her gently at first, and then, as she demanded more height, with the full arc that made her shriek with the particular joy of a child who is experiencing something delightful. And Susanna watched from the porch with her coat drawn around her and her coffee mug in her hands, and felt the specific completeness of a life that was, for the first time in a very long time, pointed in the right direction. She was carrying their child. She had known for 3 weeks but had not told Clark yet, because she was still getting accustomed to the knowledge herself, still turning it over in her private mind, this new life beginning in the middle of all the rebuilding. She told him that evening, after Lily was in bed, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp burning between them. She told him directly, in the same plain language they had always used with each other. He sat with it for a moment, and she watched his face go through something private and complicated, and then he looked at her with an expression that was entirely open, undefended, the expression of a man who has stopped protecting himself from the thing he is feeling. And she understood that she was seeing Clark Shepard without any of the careful management he had been applying to himself for 12 years, and it was magnificent. "Are you well?" he asked, which was the first thing, the thing that came before everything else. "I am well," she said. He reached across the table and took both of her hands in both of his, and he held them with the same careful fierceness he had held her the day she had said stay, and he did not say anything else for a long moment because apparently there was too much to say and he was selecting from it. "A boy," he said finally. "I think I hope for a boy," she laughed. "Do you? Is that acceptable?" "A hope is not a demand," she said. "Hope whatever you like." He turned her hands over in his and looked at them for a moment. "I am going to Santa Fe," he said. "In the spring, I am going to find that lawyer and start the process." "You do not have to do that now," she said. "I have to do it now," he said. "I cannot have a child without a name I am not hiding." She looked at him steadily. "You are not hiding your name." "I am not using it fully," he said. "That needs to change." She understood what he meant and she respected what he meant, and she squeezed his hands and said, "We will talk about it in the spring." Spring came with the specific violence that New Mexico spring sometimes produced. A week of violent thunderstorms in early March that turned the road to mud and made travel impossible. And then a sudden, extravagant warmth in late March that filled the air with the smell of wet earth and new grass and made everything feel possible. Clark went to Santa Fe in April. He was gone 2 weeks, and it was the longest 2 weeks Susanna had spent since the previous April, though the nature of the absence was entirely different. She was not alone in the way she had been alone before. She had Lily and the farm and the neighbors within distance, and a future that was pointed in a specific direction. But she missed him with a directness and an intensity that she did not try to manage or minimize, because it was honest, and she had made a commitment to honesty with herself. He came back with a lawyer's letter and a plan, and the cautious optimism of a man who had been told that his case was unusual but not impossible. The lawyer's name was Harmon Doyle, and he was a man in his 50s who had spent his career in exactly this kind of territorial legal complication, and he had been encouraged by the death of Gerald Haas and by certain records that could be obtained from the Missouri County Court. It would take time and it would take money, but Doyle believed it was resolvable. Clark and Susanna sat at the kitchen table with the letter between them and went through the numbers with the same practical attention they had given to every other thing, and they worked out that between the harvest from the east field in the fall and 3 months of cattle work that he had been offered by a neighboring rancher named Aldrich, they could cover Doyle's fee by the end of the year. "Then it is a plan," Susanna said. "It is a plan," he said. She leaned across the table and kissed him, which was still something she did not do in a casual way, which was still, after nearly a year together, a deliberately chosen thing because it meant what it meant, and he received it the same way. That summer Susanna's pregnancy became visible, and Millhaven, being a small community with the attentive social interest of small communities, noted it and responded with the range of reactions that small communities produced. Most people were warm. A few were careful. One woman, the wife of the land office manager, made a remark in the general store about the propriety of the situation that Susanna heard and did not respond to, not because she was not capable of a response, but because she had decided long ago that the opinions of people who had never faced her particular set of circumstances were not opinions she was required to manage. Clark heard about the remark from the store owner later and came home quieter than usual, and when she asked him about it he told her, and she said, "The land office manager's wife has opinions about everything. It does not concern me." "It concerns me," he said. "Why?" He looked at her with that open expression. "Because you deserve to be without that," he said. "Because you have been through enough without having to navigate petty judgment in your own town." She looked at him for a moment. "Clark," she said, "I handled a rattlesnake with a hoe. I can handle the land office manager's wife." He laughed, and the laugh was one of the things she had come to love most specifically, because it came from genuine amusement and not from performance, and it changed his whole face. "Yes," he said, "I know you can." The cattle work with Aldrich took Clark away 4 days at a time, twice a month. And during those absences, Susanna ran the farm with the competence she had been building for 2 years, and she found that the competence was now a different kind, grounded in knowledge and physical capability rather than desperate necessity, and that it felt different from the inside because of that. August brought the hardest part of the pregnancy, the weeks when the heat and the weight combined to make everything effortful, and Clark came home from a cattle job to find her attempting to repair the kitchen pump alone, lying half underneath the sink in the August heat, and his response was to lie down on the floor beside her and say, with perfect calm, "Tell me what is needed and I will do it." She looked at him from her position on the floor. "I am not an invalid." "No," he agreed. "You are a pregnant woman lying under a sink in August. There is a difference between independence and stubbornness." "There is not always a clear line between them," she said. "Perhaps not," he said. "But I am here. Tell me." She told him, and he did it, and she lay on the cool kitchen floor for a moment afterward, catching her breath, and he sat on the floor beside her and handed her a glass of water and did not make any additional comments about independence or stubbornness, and she loved him for that too. Their son was born in November, in a difficult labor attended by the local midwife, a capable woman named Ruth Alcott, who had been delivering children in the territory for 15 years. Clark was outside the door for 9 hours, and Susanna knew he was there the entire time because she could hear him, not loudly, just the occasional step, the occasional word to Lily, who was also in the house, and who had been informed that babies took a long time and had accepted this with the pragmatic patience she seemed to have absorbed from years of farm life. When Ruth Alcott opened the bedroom door and said the baby was here and Susanna was well, Susanna heard the quality of the silence that followed before she heard anything else, and then she heard Clark say, very quietly, "May I come in?" He came in and stood at the bedside and looked at his son, who was red and enormous and outraged at the conditions of his arrival, and his face did the thing it had done at the kitchen table when she had told him, the thing of being entirely open. "He is enormous," he said. "I am aware," Susanna said with feeling. "Are you well?" "I am exhausted and I am very well," she said. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and she put the baby in his arms and watched him hold his son for the first time. His hands were steady, and his face was a thing that she wanted to memorize. They named him James Thomas Shepard, because Thomas had been a good man and deserved to be remembered, and because James was Clark's father's name, who had been a good man too, and because combining both felt right in the way that combining two different histories into a single family felt right. Lily, admitted to see her brother the following morning, examined him with the critical assessment of someone who has been the singular focus of adult attention for 5 years and is now being asked to accommodate competition. "He is very ugly," she said finally. "Newborns often are," Clark told her seriously. "He will improve." "Can he come on the swing?" "Not for several years." Lily considered this. "I will wait," she said, with the magnanimity of one granting a significant favor. The winter of 1884 was gentler than the previous one, and the farm was more prepared for it, because Clark had spent the fall making preparations that went considerably beyond what Susanna had previously been able to manage alone. The root cellar was full. The woodpile was substantial. The barn had been reinforced against wind and insulated against cold, with the kind of systematic thoroughness that spoke of a man who was planning a long future in one place. The letter from Harmon Doyle came in February of 1885, a letter that Susanna read twice before she gave it to Clark, because she wanted to be certain she was reading it correctly, and because she wanted to witness his face when he read it. It said that the Missouri case had been officially reviewed on the basis of new evidence provided by the sworn statements of 2 former employees of the late Gerald Haas, who had come forward after Haas's death to correct the historical record. The charges against Clark Shepard had been vacated. The record had been cleared. He was a free man in every legal sense of the term. He read the letter at the kitchen table in the February light. He read it once and then he set it down and he was very still for a moment. Lily was outside. James was sleeping. The house was quiet. Susanna watched his face. He picked the letter up and read it again. Then he set it down and he looked at her and his expression was the open one, the full one, the one without management. "It is done," he said. "It is done," she said. She saw 12 years of careful movement resolve in his face. She saw the man he had been in Missouri before the trouble, young and unguarded, surface through the surface of the man who had been moving ever since. And she saw them integrate, those two versions, into the man sitting at her kitchen table, who was his own full name again. He said her name, just Susanna, and she got up from her chair and went to him, and he stood and held her the way he had held her on the day she had said stay, careful and fierce, and she held him back with everything she had. He went to Santa Fe that spring and changed his papers. He was Clark Shepard legally and fully for the first time in 12 years, and when he came home he brought the paperwork and showed her, and she said, "Welcome home, Clark Shepard." And he smiled at her with the smile she had been learning for 2 years, the one that started at the corners of his eyes before it reached his mouth. The East Field produced that year in the way it had been promising to produce since he first broke the ground, and they sold enough at the market in Millhaven to pay down what remained of the lawyer's fee and to begin saving toward what Clark had begun calling the improvements, by which he meant a specific list of things he intended to build on the Walker farm over the next several years. A proper smokehouse, a second bedroom for when James was old enough to leave the nursery, a covered porch on the south side where the afternoon sun came, a chicken house with a real door. They worked on the improvements together, because Susanna was not interested in being a spectator of her own property's development, and because Clark was not the kind of man who needed to own a project to work on it, and because the two of them together accomplished things at a rate that neither could have managed alone, which they both understood was true of more than just construction. Lily turned 7 and then 8 and began school in Millhaven, making the 4-mile ride in with Clark each morning on the days he went to town, sitting in front of him on the horse with the settled comfort of a child who has never been afraid of a horse in her life, because she grew up on a farm. She was a bright, talkative, confident child who had inherited her mother's directness and her adoptive father's observational habit, which was a combination that her teacher found both delightful and challenging in roughly equal measure. She still loved the swing. Even at 8, when other children might have considered themselves too old or too sophisticated for something so simple, Lily went to the swing in the afternoons with a regularity that spoke of something beyond habit. Sometimes Susanna watched her from the kitchen window and thought about fallen trees and things that could be made from them, and about the particular grace of a man who understood that the thing a child loved was worth building from whatever you had on hand. James at 2 was an entirely different kind of child from Lily, quieter, physically bold, given to long periods of silent investigation of whatever object or creature had caught his attention. He was the kind of toddler who could stare at a beetle for 20 minutes with the focused absorption of a scientist, and Clark, who had been watching him do this for several months, said one evening that he thought James might be a naturalist, and Susanna said that whatever he became, he was going to need someone who could keep up with his energy, and Clark laughed. In the spring of 1886, Susanna found that she was pregnant again. She told Clark in the same plain way she had told him the first time, at the kitchen table in the lamplight. "I hoped," he said. "You always hope," she said. "I hope correctly," he said, indicating James, who was 20 months old and currently asleep in the nursery. "I will not place a wager on the sex of this one," she said. "I will not either," he said. "Whatever it is welcome." Their daughter arrived in October, and they named her Alice, after Susanna's mother, who had died when Susanna was 18, and Alice was, from her first hours, a child of strong opinions expressed loudly and continuously, which Clark said meant she was going to be extraordinary, and which Susanna said meant they were going to need more patience. The house was full. On evenings when all 3 children were awake and present, which was most evenings, the kitchen contained Lily reading at the table and James conducting experiments with whatever he had found outdoors and Alice making her opinions known from wherever she happened to be, and Clark and Susanna in the middle of it, coordinating the domestic weather with the practiced ease of 2 people who had been doing it long enough to have developed a shared language for it. Those evenings were something that Clark had never had, and that Susanna had had in a different form, and they both knew it. And they did not always say it directly, but they felt it directly, the specific weight of a life that was full in the way that mattered. On a Sunday in the fall of 1886, with the light coming through the kitchen at the October angle that Susanna had come to associate with everything good about New Mexico, she found Clark at the kitchen table with his notebook. He did not close it when she came in. She looked at what he was drawing. It was the farm. The whole of it, drawn from above the way a bird would see it. The house and the barn and the root cellar and the smokehouse and the garden and the east field and the trees. And there was the oak, the living one at the back. And there was the swing, its small shape a precise detail in the larger drawing. He was drawing it the way you drew something you intended to keep. She stood behind him and looked at the drawing over his shoulder, and she put her hand on his shoulder, and he reached up without looking and put his hand over hers, and they stayed like that for a moment in the fall light. "You are still drawing it," she said. "I am still here," he said. Outside, through the window, they could hear Lily's voice from the direction of the swing, and James's higher voice responding, and Alice's decisive opinion on whatever the question was, and the afternoon sounds of the farm that had become as familiar as breathing. The swing creaked in the small wind, the particular creak of oak rope on oak branch that Susanna had been hearing for 3 years, and that she understood now was the sound of a specific morning in May of 1883, and of a man who had stopped at her fence line, because he had seen a little girl with her hands pressed against a fallen tree. "You know," she said, still looking at the drawing, "I have been trying to understand you since the first day." He looked up at her from the table, and I think, she said, "I have almost gotten there." He smiled at her with the eyes first smile. "You have 11 years of data," he said. "A scientist would call that a sufficient sample." "I am not a scientist," she said. "I am more cautious." "You are not cautious," he said. "You are precise. Those are different things." She leaned down and kissed the top of his head, which was something she did on afternoons when the world was being particularly generous with its evidence of good fortune. He caught her hand as she straightened and held it for a moment, looking up at her with that open face, the face she had been learning for 3 years and which she was not done learning. "Susanna," he said. "Yes. I was passing through," he said. "For 12 years I was passing through everywhere." He paused. "I am not passing through any more." She looked at him for a moment. The swing creaked outside. James shouted something in the yard. Alice responded with the forceful clarity that was already her defining characteristic. Lily laughed. "I know," Susanna said. "I have known that for a long time." She sat down beside him at the kitchen table, and he turned the notebook toward her, and she looked at the drawing. All the careful lines of the farm they had built together, the house and the outbuildings and the fields and the trees, and she picked up his pencil and added one small detail he had not included. A figure on the swing, small and round and specific, the shape of a child in motion, and she drew it with the assurance of someone putting the most important thing in its rightful place. He looked at what she had drawn, and then he looked at her, and his expression was the full one, the open one, the one without any management left in it at all. Outside, the afternoon was doing what New Mexico afternoons did in October, going golden and enormous, the light spreading across the valley with the slow generosity of something that knew it was beautiful and was not in a hurry. The swing moved in the light with the easy rhythm of a thing built to last, oak and rope, and the weight of something loved, arcing back and forth in the last of the day's warmth. Clark Shepard had been a man in motion for 12 years, and he was still now. He was still, and he was known, and he was in the right place. And the right place was a farm in New Mexico with a woman who was precise, rather than cautious, and 3 children who each required a different kind of attention, and a swing in the backyard built from oak, built from the best wood of a fallen thing, built because every child deserved something to love. He had known that to be true since he was a boy in Missouri with a sister named May who had a tree she climbed every afternoon. He knew it differently now. He knew it with the full weight of the life he had built in the place where he had stopped passing through, and with the knowledge of what it meant to be still, and with the specific, daily, unperforming evidence of a love that was built the same way the swing was built, from what was already there, and from what was needed, and from the conviction that something made with care and attention would last far longer than the thing that was lost. Susanna Walker put down the pencil and looked at her husband and the drawing between them, and she felt the completeness of it, which was not the completeness of something finished, but the completeness of something that was exactly what it was supposed to be, exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly as full as it was supposed to be. She was 33 years old, and she was home in a way that had nothing to do with Pennsylvania or with New Mexico, and everything to do with the specific gravity of the people you let yourself belong to. Outside, Lily was calling for them to come and see something, her voice carrying across the yard with the particular carrying quality of a child who knows she will be heard because she has always been heard. And Clark and Susanna looked at each other, and then got up from the kitchen table together, moving toward the door and the afternoon and the yard where their children were, moving in the easy synchrony of people who had found their way to each other through the long, complicated country of grief and motion and dark pasts and hidden things, and who had arrived, finally, at the place where the movement stopped and the life began. The swing arced through the October light one more time and was still, and then Lily climbed on it again, and it moved.